right, this is exciting, isn't it?
Here we go, guys, in 5, 4, 3.
Here we go.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Thank you for the good programming. I appreciate the content and really enjoyed every moment.
It's a privilege to have you on your station and listen. It's good stuff. It's very educational.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Okay, thanks for being here this Thursday, March 6th. A little programming note. I mentioned earlier in the week, though, if you weren't paying strict attention, you might have missed it. There will be a quiz later. I am going to go see my daughter out in California tomorrow. I will be back here on the radio airwaves exactly 1 week from today. That would be Thursday, the 13th, but you are going to be in very good hands. Bill Muck, our favorite political science professor, is going to be here tomorrow and Monday. And I think tomorrow, if I am not mistaken, a subject to change, I think tomorrow one of the people he's going to be talking to is Congressman Sean Casten. Sean Casten has been a real firebrand. He's been one of those people that's been speaking loud and long about the bad things that the Trump administration is doing and what we need to do to fight back. So Sean Casten, I believe, is going to be joining Bill Muck tomorrow. Bill Muck will also be here Monday. Tuesday, Turi Ryder. Wednesday, John St. Augustine. And then Thursday, I will be crawling back out of my bunker, and I will be back here on the airwaves with you Thursday. You know, you got to recharge your batteries, and that's how I'm planning to do it. I am planning to recharge my batteries with my daughter out in California. We're actually... let's see. I'm flying tomorrow, Saturday the 8th. We are going horseback riding. So I have not been on the back of a horse for a very, very, very long time. So if you don't see me or hear me on the radio on Thursday, it probably has something to do with a horse. But no, I have no belief that anything bad will happen. Does anybody ever see that coming? Okay. So... let's see. What is the craziness that is going on today? You know, I'm going to start with something that's a couple of things that are kind of a flashback, and then we'll get to today's nonsense about the, I wrote an executive order that says the Department of Education's going away. Well, yeah, that's not exactly how it's done. Though with the rubber stamp Congress he's got right now, I mean, why write an executive order? Just tell Mike Johnson, hey, Mikey, write up a bill getting rid of the Department of Education. Then I want it passed this week, and I want the Senate to pass it next week, and boom, we're just done. No, he's doing it by, so far, executive order. And that's going to be a big bunch of nothing. But, this way he appears to be powerful and in charge. Anyway, I shared with you yesterday, Pete Buttigieg was on with Stephen Colbert last night. They did their show. Stephen did his show live so that they could react to Trump's address. Pete Buttigieg was on. He was insightful and amusing, as always. But what I shared with you yesterday wasn't all of what Pete Buttigieg said. I used to be somebody who said, Pete Buttigieg is great, but, he's only ever been a small-town mayor. Does he have the chops to be a vice president or a president? He did, as my friends in the transportation business tell me, after perhaps a rocky start as head of that agency, he got his legs under him and came through and did, he's in charge of doing a lot of the really good consumer stuff. Oh, your flight's been delayed or canceled? Well, you're not going to have to beg for some kind of financial reimbursement. It's just going to be given to you. Stuff like that. that Pete was able to get in the pipeline for consumers, so, which is a long-winded way of saying I think that this guy, I think that this guy is going to have a very long, bright future. There's talk of, him being in the running in Michigan for the Senate seat that's going to open up there. You know, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump from the Senate to the presidency. Oh, I said it. To the presidency. I think Pete Buttigieg would make a terrific president. I really, really do. But let's go back to Pete Buttigieg on with Stephen Colbert. He made some really good points yesterday about, we heard what we were expecting to hear, Donald Trump giving a speech that's full of darkness and misinformation and lies and bravado. It was not a speech to the nation. It was a rally. That's exactly what it was. It was a campaign rally. And in this clip from the Stephen Colbert-Pete Buttigieg conversation, Stephen Colbert points out, he's looked at the surveys of voters and what they wanted to hear from Trump and what they got instead. And then Pete makes some cogent and very amusing comments. So, Lady B, just play it. Listen to this.
Well, going into this, polls showed that, about 85, somewhere in the mid-80s, people wanted him mostly to address the issues of the economy and inflation. And that somewhere in the high 20s, low 30s, believed he had done anything to address those things so far. So, what are the consequences of a president who promises that but doesn't seem to have any plan?
Well, I think disaffection, mistrust, and I think he's going to continue to slide in terms of popularity. Look, there's a good chunk of people who voted for him, even though they didn't like him, because they thought maybe he was going to make them better off. Let's remember, despite what you heard tonight, he came in with just under 50% of the vote. He won. I'm not disputing that. But the smallest popular vote margin since Nixon. I wonder how he feels about something that important being that small in his case.
You gotta love that guy. And he's like looking at Stephen Colbert all wide-eyed innocence, like I'm not even going to acknowledge what you and I both know I just said. Thank you, Pete Buttigieg. Long may you reign. I also want to turn back the clock to Wednesday when Brandon Johnson and other Democratic mayors were asked to appear before a Republican-led committee to defend this sanctuary city thing they got going. And honestly, they did really, really well. They really did. There were people who were worried it was going to be some big disaster. But for the most part, they said what was what. We have a sound clip that's actually from yesterday. Raja Krishnamurthy was one of the Democrats on that committee, and he particularly chatted with Brandon Johnson. And I didn't play this clip yesterday where they talk about ICE because Brandon really just kind of at the very end of it says kind of like, yep. But I want to share with you because for those of you, and there's a lot of confusion about just what does it mean to be a sanctuary city. And before he pauses for Brandon to chime in, Raja Krishnamurthy explains very clearly what that means. Bottom line, sanctuary city doesn't mean illegal immigrants, especially those who've committed crimes, can come to Chicago and be protected. No. It means that if a woman who doesn't have proper documentation, is being beaten by her husband, that she can go to the police, the Chicago police, and try to get her husband arrested or out of their lives. And she doesn't have to worry that if in the course of the investigation the Chicago police discover she doesn't have all of her paperwork, that they won't pick up the phone and call ICE and have ICE come over to the station and take her into custody. That's what it means. That's what it means when it says that the police, if there's a warrant out for somebody's arrest, the police are there. They're absolutely gonna participate in that. But what we found in situations like this before is people are afraid. They don't want to go. They don't want to take their kids to hospitals to get them treated for fear that somebody at the hospital will call ICE. They don't want to go to their local police station and say somebody's beating the crap out of me for fear that they will end up in custody for ICE. If ICE finds somebody on their own, especially if that person has committed a crime, nobody is going to stop that kind of ICE action. But if police work hand in glove with ICE, people will be less safe. People will be less safe. It has been shown to be the case. Parents are afraid to take their kids to school. Well, we just had an incident in Chicago where a parent, the ICE did not enter the school building, but ICE took a parent into custody as they dropped their kid off at school. And you know what people do in that case? They keep their kids home. So no schooling, don't take them to the emergency room if they get hurt, and don't go to your local police station no matter what kind of crime has been committed against you. Is that the world we want? I don't think so. I don't think so. Anyway, Raja Krishnamurthy talked about ICE and what it means to be a sanctuary city. Like I said, there's not very much of Brandon Johnson in this, but I thought it was a really good explainer, so listen to this.
Mayor Johnson, there's been much talk about Chicago and its enforcement of laws to rid our communities of criminals, so I want to give you a chance to address some of these questions. First, Mayor Johnson, the city of Chicago operates under 4 sets of laws: federal, state, county, and, of course, Chicago's own laws, right?
That is correct.
And most of these laws are not within Chicago's sole power to change. For example, the Illinois Trust Act, a state law, was enacted in 2017 by then Republican Governor Bruce Rauner and dictates interactions between ICE and law enforcement, right?
That is correct.
And under Chicago's own law, I have a copy of it right here, Chicago is required to help ICE whenever ICE presents a judicial criminal warrant for an arrest, correct?
Yes.
In fact, Chicago has assisted ICE with criminal warrants in the past, right?
Yes.
So just to clear it up, any time that ICE does the work and goes to a court to get a criminal warrant to arrest somebody, the city of Chicago not only is required to, but does cooperate to remove that criminal from our community, right?
That is correct.
Very, very clear. And before we move off this, I want to share a real quick clip. Jasmine Crockett was in that same committee meeting, and this is our unofficial Crockett's Corner. Every time Jasmine Crockett says something, it is always worth amplifying, and her quick little statement on that committee was worth amplifying. Listen to Jasmine Crockett and what she had to say.
Let me ask each of the mayors, just yes or no. Have any of you been made aware of any immigrant that has had 34 felony convictions that has still been able to roam around in your cities? Anyone?
No, ma'am.
34 felony convictions.
No, Congresswoman.
From the immigrants. Anybody?
I'm not aware.
Oh, okay. I'm just curious because we are so concerned about crime, and I know that my Republican colleagues would never want anybody with 34 felony convictions roaming around because that could be a danger to the community, but I will move on.
I am massively in love with Jasmine Crockett. Massively in love with Jasmine Crockett. By the way, she's a Democratic congressperson from Texas. Al Green, the one who stood up and yelled at Donald Trump and was escorted out of his speech Wednesday night, is also a Democrat from Texas, and he represents a district that's going to be devastated, just devastated. He represents a poor district that's going to be devastated with these cuts in Medicaid that are coming our way. And he was, the Congress voted to censure him today for his disruption of the speech. 10 Democrats, none of them from Illinois, a lot of them from more conservative areas where I guess they figure they have to throw red meat to their potential Republican voters. 10 Democrats sided with the Republicans to censure him. Not my choice, but, you know, again, you want to know why somebody does something? It all has to do with their reelection. I'd like to tell you that sometimes people do things just because it's the right thing, or it's the brave thing, or it's the moral thing, or it's the constitutional thing. But 99.9% of the time, people do things because it is going to put them in a better position to hang on to their job, put them in a better position to be reelected. That's the reality. That's why grassroots protests are effective. Yeah, because, they know, oh, my gosh, Elon Musk has a lot of money, and if I don't do what he says, not Trump, but what he says, he's going to, put a lot of money into running somebody against me, and I want to hang on to my job. So that's a big, big force. But if there are enough protests, if there are enough town halls where these people are getting screamed at, that they start to realize that whether or not Elon Musk decides to fight them, that they might not hang on to their job, that maybe the people who vote for them should be listened to over and above anything anybody in Washington's saying. That's power, my friends. That is power. Well, I'm sure you heard the news. Donald Trump wants to get rid of the Department of Education. Again, as today there was a Democratic press conference, a Senate Democratic press conference. Chris Murphy spoke, Bernie Sanders spoke, Chuck Schumer spoke, and, they made really good points. Remember, we now have an oligarchy, which is government by the rich for the rich. Rich people don't send their kids to public school. They don't. And so they don't really care about public schools. They don't care if public schools go away. It's no skin off their nose. At the Senate Democratic press conference today, news that Donald Trump is now going to start trying to close the Department of Education was the big topic. I'm going to start with what we heard from Senator Bernie Sanders, who is a senator from Vermont, tiny little state, but public schools are really, really important in Vermont, and the fear is that this isn't just about getting rid of a government bureaucracy. This is about defunding public schools because, well, why not? Who needs them, really, right? Listen to what Bernie Sanders had to say this morning.
Mr. Musk, who is worth some $400 billion, and his fellow billionaires do not have to worry about the quality of public education because they send their kids and grandchildren to fancy private schools. So what happens to public education is not of great concern to them. But for the working class of this country, high-quality public education is an imperative if their kids are going to do well in life. And the cutting of funding for 26 million low-income and working-class students, many of whom are in rural states like Vermont, will be a disaster. Mr. Musk and his fellow billionaires don't have to worry about the high cost of college because they can afford to get their kids into any college they want. But that is not the case for the 7 million working-class families who depend on Pell Grants to get a higher education. Years ago, parents who had disabilities had no decent option as to how to do well by their kids. We have made progress in that area over the years. But if Mr. Musk gets his way, 7.5 million kids with disabilities may be unable to receive the services they need in a high-quality public education. What happens to those children? What happens to those families if those services are cut? The department also enforces our federal civil rights laws to ensure all kids can get a decent education no matter what their race, creed, color, or gender may be. And let's be clear, if the federal government ceases to fund the educational needs of working-class communities, that will mean higher local and state taxes to fill the void. In other words, shutting down the Department of Education would be a disaster for low-income and working-class families in every state of our country. Do we need to make the Department of Education more efficient? I believe we do. Do we need to destroy it and wreak havoc for working-class families across this country? Absolutely not. And let me conclude by simply saying this. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We should have the best educational system in the world. Our job is to protect low-income and working-class kids all over this country. It is not to give huge tax breaks to the billionaire class and the oligarchs. The American people must stand up and tell Trump and Musk, we must not dismantle the Department of Education. Thank you.
Yep, they're going after the Department of Education. They're going after every branch of government. Tear it apart. And then figure out if some part of it that you just kicked to the curb is important. Oh, gosh. Oh, yeah. We need those people. Well, let's bring them back. Oh, wait a minute. Where are they? How can we reach them? What do you mean they've already left Washington? It's not how, Democrats have said they're all for getting rid of waste. Sure. But you don't close down an entire department and then figure out where you went wrong and then try to recreate it. And what kind of damage is done in the interim? Government is not a corporation. It doesn't work that way. And frankly, even with a corporation, like I've said repeatedly on this show, Nordstrom's feels like they're going to they want to cut waste. Okay, let's close down every Nordstrom store in the country, fire all the people who work at them, and then we'll analyze who did what and figure out who we need to bring back. Oh, yeah, that'll work. That'll work. I'm going to, at the end of the day today, share more about what Democrats had to say about the closing of the Department of Education, the purported closing, the alleged closing. One last item before we take a break and I get to your calls, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. Lady B is there waiting to take your calls. But I want to let you know about a memo that went out to all the Nexstar Media local TV stations, 200 of them. And the reason I share this is because one of those is WGN Channel 9. Sally Tully, Vice President of Local Content Development, sent out a memo saying that in deference to Donald Trump's effort to rename the international body of water along our southern border, that Nexstar stations were now supposed to start calling it the Gulf of America. Yeah, let's capitulate to this ridiculous whim of the commander-in-chief to rename randomly mountains, bodies of water, the way he feels they should be named. Oh, but we don't want to confuse people. So if in a transition period or adjustment period, you could say something like the Gulf of America, which used to be known as the Gulf of Mexico. Gulf of America, formerly known as Gulf of Mexico. So that instead of just saying this happened in the Gulf of Mexico, now they're going to be saying this happened at the Gulf of America, formerly known as the Gulf of Mexico, because that's not awkward and ridiculous and isn't going to make local anchors look awkward and ridiculous. No, not a bit of it. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more after this.
Podcasts of Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Amazon. Just search for Joan Esposito.
Out Chicago.
Kiddos, we all need to find the courage to stand up to people when they say things that are completely wrong. Like what Governor Pritzker said, we need to get ready when they sound that 5-alarm fire. We all need to be up there with buckets to douse the flames.
I'm ready.
I am too. This flamer is ready to douse the flame, and I never like to douse my flame.
Catch Out Chicago every Sunday, 11 to 1 on WCPT 820. This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Want to join the conversation?
I'm going to say exactly what I think here.
Got something to say?
Everyone needs to hear what I got to say.
Call Joan now at 773-763-9278 and join the conversation. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820.
I got a really interesting text, and I think you're probably right. I wasn't going to do this. I told you that Congressman Al Green, was censured for his standing up and berating Donald Trump about Medicaid cuts during Donald Trump's campaign rally. Oh, I'm sorry, address to Congress. And this person texted in, "Hi, Joan. Democrats voting to censure Rep. Al Green should at least be called out for placing decorum over democracy. None are local," which I said, nobody from Illinois, but this person believes they should be named. Amy Barra from California, Ed Case from Hawaii, Jim Costa from California, Laura Gillen from New York, Jim Himes from Connecticut, Chrissy Houlihan from Pennsylvania, Marcy Kaptur from Ohio, Jared Moskowitz from Florida, Marie Glusenkamp-Perez from Washington, and Tom Suozzi from New York. My guess is that those representatives come from districts that are not solidly Democratic, maybe swing districts, and that's the only explanation that I could have. Yes, I understand that it was a violation of decorum, and some people are saying, well, we don't want to. What was it? Somebody said, one of the women who voted to censure him said, well, we can't behave like that because then they'll behave like that. Sweetheart, they've been behaving like that for years. Remember when Marjorie Taylor Greene was screaming, lies, you're lying, to Barack Obama? She wasn't even escorted from the chambers. To pretend that Republicans have been behaving with decorum and that this was such a violation of the norm is ridiculous. You're absolutely right. Republicans lowered this bar. And maybe if you represent a swing state and you're worried that this is something that a Republican challenger will come after you for, maybe in the interest of your own self-preservation. But this is part of one of the things that bothered me about Joe Biden. I felt that he was governing the way politics used to be. He would do something good, and he wasn't the kind of guy to get out there and do a victory lap. I guess he just sort of assumed that everybody would see what he was doing. This was a guy who wanted to get everything done behind the scenes and then just make the announcement. The way he behaved harkened back to a more innocent time in politics, when that was the way things were done. That is not the world we live in right now. And I think some people have the fear that if we behave the way they're behaving, that somehow we will never go back to the way things used to be. But what if we never go back to the way things used to be and we're still trying to ignore all of the outrage and bad behavior being thrown our way? Don't you think we need to be pragmatic? And doesn't pragmatic mean dealing with the way things are, not the way we wish they would be? And by the way, speaking of Marjorie Taylor Greene, even though her guy was up there speaking, did you see her? Chewing gum for all she was worth. You know, I like to chew gum sometimes. I would never sit in front of the President of the United States in an address to both houses and chew gum like a cow. I wouldn't do that. To me, that is disrespectful. But hey, that's where we are. You didn't see any Democrats doing that, did you? Not yet. We have a lot of callers who are waiting to join the conversation. Let's go to Grays Lake. John is on the line. Hi, John. Thanks for the call today.
Hi, Joan. I enjoy your show. I got just a couple points. I enjoyed your comment a while back, and you just said it again. I thought about after the speech that it was a Trump rally. I mean, campaign rally.
Yeah, it absolutely was. It wasn't like, here's where we are, here's where we're going, here are my plans, this is what we're going to do, this is why it's going to be great. No, it was, it was like, hey, America's back again, baby.
Yeah, and 90% of it was lies. I mean,
yes.
I was.
That's why I finally threw in the towel.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, you said it well. I haven't heard it on any other station. It was a rally. It was you said a campaign, so I call it a Trump rally.
Yeah, you're right. That's more accurate.
Oh, yeah. Well, anyways, no, you're totally accurate. Anyways, the other point is, with these threats of tariffs, now my thought is quite possibly he might not even do them. He might back out on the 11th hour. But that's the way, even in his last term, I noticed, and I pointed out to a Trump supporter, a friend of mine. He lives in Nebraska. And I told him, I said he creates problems to fix them. Mm-hmm. When there's no problem at all, he messes up the economy. And then, 6 months later, the people that voted for him will say, oh, wow, look what he did, though. No, he created that problem. It wasn't a problem until he, threw a wrench into it, whatever the term is,
Yeah.
He messes it up.
Yeah, he's going to threaten these tariffs, put them in place. There's going to be terrible consequences, and then he's going to take it all off and go, look what I did, how I fixed this.
Yeah, and, a low information voter will just say, wow, well, look what he did. It's I don't know if they just don't follow it, through the whole from start to beginning. But I'm retired. I'm 70 now and I'm retired, so I really follow politics now. But hopefully more people do. And thank you for your, the way you phrase things is perfect. And it is what it is. It's a Trump rally.
Yeah, it absolutely was. It was not inspirational. It was not informational. It was throwing more red meat to the base. Thanks for the call, John. I appreciate that. Let's go to Sid, who is on the line from Chicago. Hey, Sid.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, and you?
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Good.
Haven't talked to you in a long time. I want to say a few things. Number one, about treating the government as a business. As a business, you can just fire people and pretend they never existed. The government is there to protect us all. Right? You can't just get rid of people and stop taking care of them. That is the job of the government. Okay? I'm sick of everybody thinking that we need to treat the government as a business. And I want to remind people that the biggest debt we've been in compared to the GDP was after World War II. And the way we got out of it was by investing in our people. We created the GI Bill, and we built the interstate highway system. We invested our way out of it. We didn't do it through austerity.
Yep. Yeah,
okay?
absolutely.
I just remind people of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that we did at the time is we taxed the rich up to 92%. The tax rate on the rich was 92%. It's currently at 37%. Now, I'm not suggesting we take it all the way up to 92%, but the reason that it was so high was half of it was for revenue. The other half of it was to make sure that money was flowing. We gave them lots of ways out of it, right? There's stories about, the newsman Brinkley having like 50 secretaries rather than pay 90% on his money, right? He had gardeners and chauffeurs, right? Let's make it so that it makes sense to hire people as opposed to paying taxes. Let's make them penalize them for not investing in our workforce. Okay, I just wanted to say
I think the big point that you're making is entirely valid. Any society, any country, any government, you look at what causes political instability, and one of the major causes of political instability is income inequality. When you've got a super, super wealthy, this is what led to revolution in Cuba. There was a super, super wealthy 1%, and everybody else was poor. So when Fidel Castro came along, guess what? All the poor people were like, hell yes. Hell yes, we're on your side. Right. We don't care if you're a communist. And that's right. Over starting with, like you're right, under Dwight David Eisenhower, we taxed the rich. And it started with every Republican president. Seemingly, they knocked it down and knocked it down and knocked it down. And now we are where we are, where we have this super wealthy class that is terrified that somehow they're going to have to sell one of their 15 yachts and the rest of us.
Right. And I think that you reward them from being rich by giving them ways out of their taxes that are healthy for all of us. Solar panels on your roof on your 14 houses, right?
Yep.
Do things that are good for the economy and hire people. Have a gardener and 2 chauffeurs. Spoil yourself, but that should all be tax deductible. And let's get people jobs. Right now, I feel like we are going to collapse all kinds of job markets by releasing 200,000 federal workers.
Oh, Sid, I think we are looking at a unless Republicans stand up or Trump changes course, I think we are looking at a serious economic downturn in this country. The stock market is crashing again today. And Donald Trump, he may not care what you think, Sid, or what I think, but he pays attention to the stock market. And if the stock market continues to slide, that might be something that actually reins him in.
Absolutely. I mean, remember, when things are tough, you don't want to start loosening the workforce. If you live in a town where there's room for 20 plumbers and there's 23 plumbers, every single one of them has to knock down their bids until 3 people quit. Mm-hmm. Right? That is how the workforce works. Mm-hmm. Right?
And so all those people who lose their job and suddenly are flooding the workforce trying to find jobs, they're not making as many trips to the grocery store. They're not eating out at all. They're not buying new clothes. They're not, they're gonna tighten their belts and make the domino effect. It is going to be awful. Just awful.
But it is a vicious circle, right? Because it all starts to tighten all at the same time. Well, that's all I had to say. I enjoy your show.
Well, thanks,
every day.
Sid.
I listen to you while I drive.
Well, thanks, Sid. I appreciate the call. We are going to take a break. Right. We're going to be back with more calls after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number 1 on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We are taking your calls and reading your texts. A lot of people are still upset with what they are seeing from Democratic leadership. Mark texted in, I feel like most of the Democratic leadership is offering Trump roses while he's offering our economy and Ukraine the gas chamber. Let's stand up for the disabled, poor, and middle class. I think that's exactly what we have to do, Mark. Right now, let's go back to the phone lines to Franklin Park, Illinois, where Al is on the line. Hey, Al, thanks for the call.
Hello, Joan. It's good to talk to you. How are you?
So far, so good. How about you?
Pretty terrible. I'm honestly, I'm just frankly tired of everything I hear and see. The thing that bugs me, like this thing with Al Green. I mean, that's wrong. And you know, in Blue Sky, there's a couple examples where people go to these town hall meetings and stuff, and they're carted out just like they did to him. You know, why is it that he's the only one? Nobody gets up. You know, I hear all Democrats say, fight, fight, fight. How are you going to fight if you're the only one getting up? You're the only one getting carted out. And something else for you to consider. You know, late-breaking news just came out April 2nd. Trump is holding off on all those tariffs. Okay, he's waiting, he's backing down because, yeah, the stock market's gone bad. And, yeah, you know, there's going to be massive things to pay. Who do you think he's responding to? Not us.
Not us.
He's responding to that, exactly. To, you know, the premier from Canada up there, you know, that Ford guy. Yeah, he's going to steal the power.
Well, there was a meeting. It was reported after the fact when he announced the pause in the tariffs. The leadership of Stellantis, of Ford, and GM, if they didn't communicate with Trump directly, they communicated with his top people, and they said, don't do this. This is going to kill us. And then they got their 1 month reprieve.
Right, but see, my thing is this. Yeah, God bless Canada. They're a good friend. I got family up there, all that kind of stuff. But they shouldn't be the ones fighting for our democracy. That's what's wrong. You know, where are we? We're just watching and waiting for what? You know, and I hate to say it, but, you know, if you look at Russia, look at that Bolnami guy. He stuck to Putin and all that, and what happened to him? He's one voice. That's what happens to your one voice.
Yep. I hear you. And I think I talked to the McHenry County Democratic women a couple of weeks ago, and I said to them, nobody is coming to save us. Don't look to leadership to save us. Look around at the other people sitting at your table. Those are the people who are going to save us. You, your friends, the people at the next table over. It's up to us to save ourselves. I believe that.
And just one last thing to mention is when you talk about Trump, look what was behind him. You know, go back to the January 6th thing. There wasn't one guy, you know, running like a monkey up the Capitol steps. It was a legion of what you want to call them, of you know, craziness or whatever, but they all stood up for what they thought was right, what they thought should be done. It was not one, it was thousands of them. And where are our thousands? I don't see it. I just hear, oh, this is right or this is wrong. But Congress people that do nothing, they went to the State of the Union with a little flag and wear something pink or something. That doesn't get anything turned. You know, yeah, we here in Illinois, we got some Congress people that they're on the right side of stuff. They're not the ones that, you know, voted to censor, you know, Al Green.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky us. But what happens after that?
That's the question. There you go. You hit the nail on the head, Al. And that's the question we have to deal with going forward. Al, thank you so much for calling in today. I really appreciate it. And somebody texted in, too. You know, as I said, Congressman Al Green stood up and yelled that Trump was lying about cuts to Medicaid, saying that Medicaid was going to be protected when everybody knows that it's not, because the only way they can finance their tax cuts for the super wealthy is by getting rid of programs or hurting programs like Medicaid. Somebody texted in whose congressperson was one of the 10 Democrats who voted to censure Al Green for his outburst. And this person says that her congresswoman barely beat the MAGA candidate last time around. And she thinks that that's why this woman is not being so stridently, vocally, Democratic. And I get that. I get that. I mean, I live in an area that's Democratic, but we certainly have a lot of conservative voters. And that, like I said, that makes a difference. If a congressperson wants to continually be reelected, they have to answer to their voters, all of their voters. And if a congressperson can't get reelected with purely Democratic votes, they have to behave in a way that allows some Republicans to justify voting for them. Okay, let us go back to the phone lines. Our good friend Jim from Chicago is on the line. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Joan. I wish I could blow town for a week, but my circumstances won't allow it.
You can be jealous of me. Absolutely, you can be. And I'm going to be, well, I can't say that I'm going to be on a news blackout because Monday when I'm out in California, I'm actually having dinner with both David Lehman, the retired newsman I have on all the time, and
terrific.
Bruce Rines, the other retired newsman. So I'm sure there will be.
Well, yeah, you'll have a lively conversation there, but at least when you're on the horse with your daughter, you can think about staying alive. You can think about staying alive.
Whether or not I'm going to have saddle sores.
Right. But think of this. What if Nixon could have tailor-made his press room 50 years ago? He never would have had to resign. Now, we're 50 years later, we live in a country to think this is Jake. Trump can pick his own press, allow only people in there that are going to, whatever they're going to do, capitulate to everything this imbecile says. But the American never would have stood for that, Joan, in 1973. I guarantee you. I don't know what happened over those 50 years, how we got into a spot like this. They never would have allowed that to happen. I mean, everybody would have went nuts if Nixon would have said, no, I'm only taking questions about, I don't want to hear anything about Watergate or anything. That's all fake news. That's all fake news.
Well, you know what? If Fox Cable had existed back in Nixon's day, and they were going on the air every day saying, oh, he needs to stand up, he needs to fight, would Nixon have resigned? The only reason Nixon resigned is because Barry Goldwater, who was a pretty far-right Republican, came to him and said, it's over, dude. You're going to be, not only are you going to be impeached, but you're going to be convicted. Do yourself a favor, resign, walk away. Would Barry Goldwater, who probably would have been prominent on Fox Cable on a daily basis, would Barry Goldwater have gone to Nixon and said, you better walk away? Or would he have said, hey, just double down and hang on, we'll get through this?
Yeah, but there was a drumbeat in the press. I made a sizable bet that he'd be out of office by Thanksgiving. And because I could tell just the drumbeat in the press. But now there isn't one. That's what disturbs me. If we're ever at dinner with your good friends there, I'm sure you'll go over that for a moment. But anyway, Joan, have a great vacation. Thanks for taking my call, Joan. Thank you.
Thank you. We got time for another call. Let's go to Lake in the Hills. Our good friend Greg is on the line.
Hi, Joan.
Hi, how are you?
Hello to everybody out there. Yeah, the reason I'm calling in today, you remember the State of the Whatever address the other night. One of the things that Trump mentioned was that we're spending all this money on this program for transgendered mice.
Oh my God, he's such an idiot.
I saw a thing yesterday on YouTube from Occupy Democrats, but then I also came across an article about the same today, and what he was confusing, and I'm sure they were just using it. They probably knew whoever wrote it up for them. But transgender is actually transgenic, and it's a process used to prepare the specimens, the mice, to be able to better allow the scientists to run the tests on them. And some of the tests they run on them do involve putting in, testosterone or estrogen or things like that. But it doesn't turn the mouse into the opposite sex. But that's
no,
one thing.
it's a specialized, genetically modified type of mouse that is used throughout much of medical research. It's not, you're right, it's not transgender, it's transgenic, and it is a specifically bred mouse that is used in all different kinds of medical research because of its unique genome. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And one last thing, if I could. A long, long time ago, back in February 23rd, 2024, you had a caller on. Her name was Stephanie, and she was from Thornton Township. And my understanding was she and her family or her father or whatever, they owned a farm, and she was talking about the divide between the central part of Illinois and the southern part of Illinois and the northern part of Illinois. And I thought what she said, and she's been on your show since one time I remember. I just wanted to say, I don't know if she's listening, but if she is, she spoke for me that day. I really liked what she said, and I've always remembered it. I even copied down the old SoundCloud link because of it. But that was one person that I met through your show, and boy, what a person, and a fellow Illinoisan, and I wish all Illinoisans could kind of feel a kinship. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Enjoy your time away in California, I think it was. And,
yes. Maybe
really
I'll post a picture on Instagram of me on the horse. What do you think? Give everybody a little something to laugh at before I get back.
Come on. You're doing a lot more than just sitting on a horse. You're leading the cavalry here.
Well, that's very kind of you, Greg. And thank you for the call. We are going to take a break for news, and we'll get going right after this.
Remember when you get to work to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app and stream The Stephanie Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to 11 a.m. on Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Joan, as always, exceptional work from you. From, your TV days all the way up to today. You're truly exceptional, and thanks for this great show you have.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
I'm very pleased to welcome back to our airwaves Behnam Ben Talablu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Behnam is an expert on Iran, and I welcome you back, Behnam, and I have so many questions, so very many questions. First of all, though, how are you?
Joan, it's great to be back with you. Sorry for the delay. As you could imagine, things were quite explosive in the region over the past few weeks, and it's really great to be back on the show and in conversation with you and the listeners.
Yeah, explosive. That's a really good word for it. Let's go back as far as the UN vote, where the United States refused to sanction Russia and, in fact, voted with Iran, with Russia, with North Korea. Did that shock and surprise you?
Well, let me, because I think I know exactly where we're building up to, and it ends with Schmoval office. This entire ordeal, and I want to call it an ordeal, there's much blame to be thrown around on all sides, I think both stylistic and substantive, but there is one large direction, and the superpower is supposed to act like a superpower. A superpower built on liberal values is supposed to act like a superpower built on liberal values, even when pursuing a more narrow, judicious, definition of the national interest and the public good. And it's quite clear to me that the stereotype on the street about foreign policy and domestic politics in Washington is increasingly becoming true. And that means that if you're a hawk on Russia, today you're more likely in the Democratic Party. If you're a hawk on Iran, today you're more likely in the Republican Party. And if you're a hawk on China, you simply exist in Washington, D.C. in a bipartisan or nonpartisan fashion. All of that being said, The reason I think the UN vote was an own goal is not just because of who the U.S. voted with, because there's a long, actually you can go through and correlate UN votes in some places like Law of the Sea and Rome Statute. The U.S. is in some very interesting voting pools, more because of our own kind of philosophical debates about sovereignty, and I won't get into that here. But on the flip side, not only did this send the worst possible message to the whole constellation of beleaguered democracies, in the Middle East, where our adversary Iran is also fighting Israel, to in Europe, where our adversary Russia is fighting Ukraine, to prospectively the one area that I said there is great nonpartisan or bipartisan convergence on, which is Asia, the China threat, our friend and our partner in Taiwan. All of them, adversaries and allies alike, are watching, have been watching, and I think respectfully it was a major moral and political own goal that could have strategic ramifications down the line. And let me just say this, if we do link the UN vote to the Oval Office, which is that I'm an Iran watcher. I'm looking at what's going on in the Middle East through the prism of what's best for the U.S. national interest and how we can marry our partners' interests with our interests and our security to get like the biggest possible win possible. But here I got to tell you, whenever we fight, whether it's over the hostage issue with Israel, Gaza ceasefire with Israel, armaments to Ukraine, or, the future of the force posture in East Asia with Taiwan, whenever we fight publicly with our democratic friends, it's our authoritarian adversaries that win. It's not the right owning the left or the left owning the right. All that stuff is actually kind of quaint and limited to cyberspace. In the real world, in the kind of unfortunate guns and bombs and dollars world, the bad guys win when we fight ourselves, when Americans fight ourselves, and when we fight so publicly with our democratic partners and allies. So
some people would have said that was the point. That was the point, to show the world, to signal to the world that we weren't going to be the superpower that everybody can count on. As a matter of fact, we might even be switching sides. I thought that was the point of that vote.
I mean, I think, I'm more of a foreign policy watcher than domestic, but I do think the vote had much more domestic policy. The word of the 2024 election is vibes, by the way. I would say the vote had more domestic policy vibes than anything else. But if you want to, ascribe a foreign policy motivation onto it, I don't see it as switching sides. I think this administration has a theory of the case that it's close to, but not as strategically rooted in what the Nixon administration did with the Sino-Soviet split and being able to flip China and bring it in from the cold. Also, we saw during that time in the second-term Nixon administration the move towards bringing in Egypt out of the Soviet orbit and towards into the American orbit. I think the Trump administration thinks that it is possible today that you can disconnect the dots between Russia and this other authoritarian axis of adversaries like China, North Korea, and Iran. I don't think so. And that's why I think even small things that are signaling votes, like in the UN, end up having a much greater weight and much greater political, moral, and strategic cost. But if I had to ascribe a foreign policy motivation, and I think, again, largely that vote may have come from America's very cantankerous domestic politics and even culture war over what it means to stand with Ukraine. Because remember, President Trump also in the Oval Office strenuously drew that contrast between the Obama-era blankets and the Trump-era javelins, and that also draws a stark contrast with his Term 2 philosophy of how to go ahead with Ukraine compared to his Term 1 philosophy. I think that the domestic politics was the greater motivator, and if you're looking at a foreign policy signal, I think it was this idea that rather than us joining their side, we could get the Russians to flip sides, which, in my view, fundamentally misunderstands the way the Russians are playing ball in Central and Eastern Europe, and also fundamentally understands this growing authoritarian axis of aggressors that is challenging America and the American order in so many new ways.
Let me see if I understood what you just said. You think that part of the motivation of this is that we think that somehow we can embrace Russia and pull Russia away from its relationships with North Korea and Iran be like our little bubble and not their bubble?
I think, well, if you look at some of the other things the administration is reportedly considering, the standing down of the cyber attacks, for example, these are behaviors, when you look into American foreign policy history, we do to signal to an adversary that we don't harbor, malign interests. I think, for example, the Nixon administration stopped certain maritime patrols to signal, some kind of friendship with China. I think even the Obama administration stopped, the crackdown on Lebanese Hezbollah, even in South America, for example, to tell Iran, look, we're not going so vigorously after your proxy, so you might as well enter this nuclear deal. So if I had to ascribe a foreign policy logic to the vote and to everything else, it's that we think we can pull Russia out of this orbit, perhaps not put them into the American orbit, but pull them out of this orbit. And if you can't even do that, then perhaps you can create some shocks and some doubts and some bumps in the relationships between Russia and these countries that already exist because of a friendly American overture. Now, I highly doubt this is at all possible, which is why I think the most prudent American policy now is to recognize these relationships for what they are, expose them to limelight, counter them economically, politically, in cyberspace, on the battlefield, and work with your partners to actually do what Term 1 Trump and Term 2 Trump, and actually really everything that Obama had been saying in Term 1 and Term 2 about NATO and Europe as well, which is to have our friends play a role, have our friends carry the burden.
Okay. I saw the vote in the UN as North Korea and Iran celebrating the U.S., at the very least, dipping a toe into the axis of evil cabal. Not that, he's stepping in and our bromance with Russia is going to come to an end. Do you think there's anybody who saw it as, oh, no, Donald Trump is going to lure Vladimir Putin's affections away from us? It doesn't seem to be what I've been reading, but do you think that that's what they're thinking?
Again, I think if I had to ascribe a motivation to the UN vote, it has much more to do with American domestic politics and how Ukraine has become part of the culture war. If one has to ascribe a foreign policy motivation to it, it's the attempt by this administration to try to pull Russia out of that orbit or to limit the linkages that exist in that orbit. And I gave you examples in the Nixon administration, a Republican, and the Obama administration, a Democrat.
But we were alienated from China. I was, sadly, because I'm very old, I was actually alive during that whole Nixon reopening China thing. But I never got the feeling, either from the reporting or from things that were published, that it wasn't like China was, doing terrible things in the world and that somehow we wanted to align with them. It was more like, hey, there's this big group of people and we're just, for what appears to me to be no good reason, we've been alienated and let's talk to them now. But it wasn't like China was actively trying to invade Japan and take it over at that time. China, I guess what I'm trying to say is China didn't seem that evil. It was communist and it was mysterious and we didn't have a relationship, but it wasn't like they were actively trying to take over the world. That's why I think that the Nixon thing it felt different.
Well, this is not at all an age comment, because one has to go even further because Communist China, as you know, did intervene in the Korean War. Communist China was a major armor of Soviets, but also its own equipment to the North Vietnamese prior to Afghanistan, what was the longest American military adventure or misadventure called the Vietnam War. And so there certainly was a logic into trying to change what was actually not peaceful Chinese behavior, but revisionist Chinese behavior. And, one need not even see this through the partisan lens, because there was significant Republican criticism, not even of the political side, but of the moral side of the, détente and the opening with China. None other than, I think you could say, the father of modern American conservatism, William F. Buckley. He was one of the few reporters who actually went on that trip to China. He wrote a pretty lackluster report, and he attacked the Nixon administration from the right, not the left, on the opening with China. So, unfortunately, there are great parallels here. And when you do zoom out, you see the Obama dance with Iran, the Nixon dance with China, and one wonders if the Trump attempt to dance with Russia will historically be seen through the same light or through a drastically different light. But one reason I'm much more skeptical of the current era is because it's not just one power, it's many powers. And the difference today is that the individual regimes, the Kim regime in Pyongyang, the Islamic Republic in Iran, Ali Khamenei, Putin's regime in Russia, in Moscow, and the Xi dynasty, the Xi regime of the CCP in Beijing, individually as leaders, they have more in common now as authoritarians who are fighting their own populations to stay in power. And worse, all of them in their foreign policy behavior abroad are more bullish, more hawkish, and they all believe that the regional balance of power around them is artificial, and militarily they're coordinating to actually revise that balance, and they hold us and they hold our Democratic partners accountable. Let me give you some dangerous news just a few days ago that was broken, and I feel like really has not made the impact that it should, which is that in between last year's historic Iranian direct ballistic missile attacks at Israel, once in April and once again in October, right after the April one and right before the October one, there were Russian missile engineers in Iran. So just as we said before on this show, the problems of the Middle East don't remain confined to the Middle East. Well, now the threats of Europe don't remain confined to the European continent. What comes from Iran to Russia will go from Russia to Iran, and that's why it's imperative that not just this administration, but Congress, on a bipartisan basis, and any administration that follows, sees these newfound linkages for what they are and is done with this theory that you can quarantine the world. Because if we're going to go back to the Cold War, the playbook was it was very cold between the U.S. and the Soviet Union because it was quite literally hot everywhere else.
Interesting. I want to talk to you more about Iran. We need to take a break. Ben Talablu is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and an expert on Iran. We will be back with more after this.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
Because facts matter. You're listening to WCPT 820.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
And I'm joined by Ben Talablu, senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. He is an expert on Iran. And you were just talking before the break about how the Iran missile strikes on Israel, that they were getting some technical help from Russia. This vote in the UN, the tongue lashing that Zelensky was put through at the White House, how do you think Iran how are they thinking about us now? We are obviously, Trump is still a very strong supporter of Netanyahu, so there's that. Trump is also seemingly a very strong supporter of Putin. So what does Iran think about all this, as best you can tell?
Well, again, I don't see the U.S.-Israel relationship anything at all like the U.S.-Russia relationship, because what's happening now and over the past few days is that the Russians are sensing this kind of American willingness to play ball across a whole host of areas. such that you have even very publicly, President Trump's comment about the shalom with Hamas. It could mean hello or goodbye. And then also you have the Russians looking to take advantage of this inclination and offer up their services as intermediary or negotiator between the Americans and the Iranians. And this is actually a very kind of challenging situation for the Iranians to have to navigate because, on the one hand, the Russians are the lawyers of the Iranians in all these international fora. They deflect pressure for them. That's, again, what a partner does. They deflect pressure for them. They help, create a narrative that, Iranian actions can later fall into. There's greater political, military, economic, intelligence, even likely nuclear and space exchanges and collaborations. There's all these signs of a tightening and warming relationship. But at the same time, if you broaden the aperture just a bit more, not the Islamic Republic and Putin's China, but Iran and Russia have at least 500 years of structural enmity, mistrust, that is really baked into the relationship that is still hard to come over, such that when news broke in Iran that the Russians would be or have offered to mediate between, Trump and Iran, what's left of the reformist press, the ailing reformist press in Iran, went up in really flames. They were like, the Russians don't have our back. This is a minority opinion, not among society, because society actually strongly hawkish against Russia, but much of Iran's deep state, the Islamic republics, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, their national security establishment, for the past 20 years of the past 25, 26 years they've been in existence, they've had a strongly Eastern orientation. China, economic and military, Russia, military and political. And that's how they believe that they're going to be surviving. And that gets us to how this entire authoritarian axis was really built between all these countries that really do oppose us. So the deep state, if you can, in Iran, nonetheless welcomed the move, whereas you had what was left of the ailing reformist faction still very skeptical, believing that the Russians would sell Iran out to the Americans at the right price. In my view, those reformers don't seem to have a good understanding of what the Trump administration's priorities are, because while there is this new memorandum called National Security Presidential Memorandum No. 2 that talks about the administration's restoration of maximum pressure sanctions against the Islamic Republic, and really, if you can remember, harkens back to former Secretary Pompeo's 12 points on Iran, which deal with nuclear, terrorism, regional missile, and even hostage-taking. Beyond that, it's unclear to me right now how much of a tier one political priority countering the Iranian threat is for the administration, given all the political stuff with Russia and Ukraine, given the tariff war, given the stated imperative of the border and the Western Hemisphere, and most importantly, given this one area that I told you is really nonpartisan in Washington, which is trying to keep pace with and counter the China challenge. So the issue seen through the Iranian lens is very kaleidoscopic. But let me tell you what I think is at play in Iran, which is that I think Tehran is trying to set a trap for Trump. This is my view. They are trying to, despite publicly saying no to talks, they are trying to take advantage of the inclination to play ball across the board. And again, we mentioned some of those examples very recently, Hamas, Russia, what have you, and try to lure in the presidents by increasing the asking price for talks. That's why you have the foreign minister saying, no, we won't talk. That's why you have the supreme leader now saying, no, we won't talk. Believe it or not, saying no is part of the Iranian charm offensive because they want to be pursued. They want to be pursued. It's basically like they want to play this chase game. And that's not because I think the regime genuinely wants to negotiate over its nuclear future. Is that I think it wants to stall for time because 2025 is such a critical year because the regime is so weak, and at the same time its nuclear program is so exposed, and at the same time Israel really does stand a chance of perhaps not destroying the nuclear program, but being able to land a blow against critical regime assets. So I think the Iranians are going to be trying to set the table to lure in the Americans for talks, apparently now perhaps midwifed by the Russians, to use the idea of talks as a human shield and a deterrent against prospective Israeli military action. The whole thing is just kaleidoscopic.
That's really three-dimensional chess there. I think you've given us a lot to think about and a lot to keep an eye on. What are the things that you are going to be keeping an eye on in the news? An occurrence, a negotiation, a statement that you think is going to be indicative of what's going on behind the scenes?
Well, I would keep my eye on the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors. You've had the Quad, the E3, which is the European, the French, the Germans, the Brits, and the Americans issue a very strong condemnation of Iran's fast escalating nuclear program. Lest we forget, we have friends across the pond in Europe who care just as much about stopping a nuclear Iran as we do, and how the Trump administration brings them on board or heaven forbid, rejects them, particularly as they come to embrace on their own speed the traditional American position of pressure on Iran. I have my eyes on that, on this changing European position, and if the Trump administration has a diplomatic ground game to work with our European friends and benefit from their changed disposition to develop a multilateral pressure policy towards Iran. And the European statements at the IAEA really do offer that. I hope the administration takes this as an opportunity to multilateralize its maximum pressure. But again, only time will tell which path we will take.
Benim Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Amazon, or HeartlandSignal.com. Just search for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am very pleased to welcome back to our airwaves Peter Fenn, who's a Democratic political strategist. When we talked to Peter last time around, I felt like we were just in the middle of our conversation when we ran out of time. So Peter has graciously made more time to talk with us today. So, Peter, how you doing?
Well, I don't know. How am I doing? I tell you, I couldn't get through the whole speech.
I was just going to ask you how long you lasted.
I lasted close to an hour, but my word. And I have to tell you, I think that if I were in that hall as a member of Congress, after the first 10 minutes, I might have got up and walked out myself.
I'm surprised more Democrats didn't, because it was, first of all, I was surprised he was so smug. He got a little bit derailed by Al Green when Al was shouting at him. I think I think I saw a momentary flash across his face, like, are the Dems going to do this all night? But up until then and shortly thereafter, he was just so smug. And it felt to me like he really wanted everybody to bow down to him, because it was just things like, he said things that are relatively meaningless just to get the crowd on their feet. America's back, baby.
Yeah. You and I have seen a lot of these, Joan, over many years, and I've never seen anything like it. I mean, it was so far away from a speech. It really wasn't a speech. It was a harangue, and it was pound his chest. And between his attacks and his nastiness and his retributions, it was, I'm the greatest thing since the Lord Almighty. Mm-hmm. And,
yes, exactly.
I've never seen a president. I mean, we've seen very confident presidents, right, who are self-confident, but nothing as crazy as that. And that's why I would just, I think the Democrats have got to really deal with this guy straight up. Yeah. I mean, I think trying to ignore who he is, we'll get by this, or, you know, James Carville, who I love dearly, known for decades and decades, I think he's full of it.
You
I mean,
betcha.
James says, let's just lay back and let it, you know, he'll fall in his own weight, and, you know, we shouldn't engage. And I'm thinking, James, of all people, what are you smoking?
Yeah,
And
because here's the thing. The Republicans have Congress. They have the Senate. It's not like they're going to somehow wake up. They are going to do bad things. They are going to do bad things that the Democrats can't stop. But if the Democrats just disappear, and then as Carville was suggesting, like parachute in when it's 6 weeks before the midterms, like, we're going to save you. I think people would look at the Democrats and say, where the heck have you been? I've been fighting this war by myself, and suddenly you think that, you know, you're going to be my savior? Oh,
right.
No.
Let me try something out on you on this, Joan. Suppose the Democrats in the House and in the Senate use their 1 minutes in the House where they can give these addresses, and they organize themselves around a very simple theme. The theme is what's going on, like the old song.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do every single day is they use that floor time, and they're on C-SPAN, and they have a bigger crowd around them, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not one person in the well and nobody else in there listening. And you organize this saying, hey, look, this is what they're telling you. These are the facts.
Yeah.
Today we're going to concentrate on the environment and EPA. You know, tomorrow we're going to concentrate, you know, on what they're doing to agriculture and FEMA. In other words, you lay this thing out every single day.
Yep.
And you then take that and go viral with it. And then it gives the grassroots folks something to hang their hat on, right? The grassroots goes, oh, this stuff is good. These guys are on. And the one just big, to me, shining light was on Tuesday was Alyssa Slotkin. She was fabulous. Absolutely right on, in my view. She was as straight up as your good governor there in Illinois on his State of the State address. But if you organize this cleverly, you can get your message out. And you can correct the not. I mean, this guy, I don't know how he does it. He every minute of that speech, he had a lie in it. Right? I mean, he had a factual
Was it that long? Did he go a full minute between lies?
Well, I'm not sure. That's a good question. I mean, the Post, your listeners, you may have already told them about this, but the fact checker, Glenn Kessler in the Washington Post, ripped him the next day into a new one with all the stuff that was wrong. Well, you know, we've been doing that. We did it for 4 years when he was president with 35,000 lies that the Washington Post came up with. Mm-hmm. But, you know, we do this every day now. If we're smart, we lay this stuff out. And then you begin to, you know, go into, hey, here's what we really should do. Here's the right way to do this stuff. But basically, you're the minority. You got to be the minority. You got to fight back. And that's why James, I think, you know, I just think he's not playing with a full deck on this one.
And it's not like it's, you know, because I think his idea is something that I've heard other people say. Well, people voted for this, you know, let them feel the pain so that they understand, you know, where they went awry. And it's not like we have to sit back for that to happen. That's going to happen anyway. And right. I think I would take it even further. You know, I love your idea about everybody staying on message and a different message every day, but I think we've got to go for all the platforms. I think we've got to assign, okay, you are the ones who are going to be speaking today. You're going to be out in front of the Treasury building. You know, you're going to be out in front of housing and urban development. You're going to be trying to get in. You're going to be rattling the doors. Maybe you get arrested. At the very least, you have a press conference and you have the cameras there. I think they need to be everywhere all at once.
I totally agree with that, and I think most of these folks in the Congress, or even people that are out there with non-governmental organizations, environmentalists, or labor people, or LGBT people. I mean, they're ready to fight, and I think you give them a job to do, and boy, they'll do it.
Yep.
So I totally agree with that strategy. I think the problem we've had is we knew what was coming, but we didn't quite know how fast it was coming.
Exactly.
And the one thing that we can talk about how bad this stuff is, and we can talk about the implications of it, because I think we got to get to the policy side, and not just the fact that this is a big, terrible person. They know he's a big, terrible person, and they don't like Musk and all that. It's fine, you can sprinkle that in. But it is the incompetence. I mean, you just have to show these people. This is the gang that couldn't shoot straight. This is a crowd that the old Vietnam phrase. We had to destroy the village in order to save it. I mean, that's what these folks actually, unfortunately, believe, and that has to be clear to people. And once that happens, I think you get the shift. The other issue, I think, I love the sign by the Congresswoman from New Mexico. This is not normal. But the other part of that, Joan, is that, and I felt this in the in his first term, the people, they wanted not normal. They were asking for not normal initially, but they're getting not normal bad, not normal good.
Exactly.
And that's anybody who's looking at what we are facing in America right now and just thinks, this is just politics, and then you win or you lose and blah blah blah. That's not it. I mean, we're in a whole different era, and we have to treat it and fight it and think outside the box, because this is totally different from where we've been as a country for so long.
I agree with you. I think there was a segment of people who voted for Trump because they just want to burn it all down. And when Pete Buttigieg was on with Stephen Colbert, he said that he thought Trump made a big mistake by not talking about kitchen table issues because, in the words of Pete Buttigieg, a lot of people voted for Donald Trump who really didn't like him, but they thought that maybe inflation would be better, or their income would be better, or the price of eggs would be better. And so they sort of held their nose and voted for him, and that those are the people who we are likely to be able to bring over to our side in the upcoming midterm elections. And I think a perfect example of that, Washington Post, you may have seen this a couple days ago, featured on its homepage a 24-year-old woman who didn't want to really vote for Trump, really believed the sexual assault allegations against him, felt that he was a bad man. But in his campaign speeches, he said that he was going to make in vitro fertilization free. And she said to the Washington Post that she stood in the little polling place for 15 minutes trying to decide if she could vote for this man she considered a bad man. But she and her husband had started to try to have a family. They were having difficulty. And she basically thought, if I can get free IVF, then I can basically turn a blind eye to the rest of it. She worked for the Park Service and lost her job under Trump. So not only does she not get free in vitro fertilization, she doesn't even have a job now.
Because of Donald Trump. Absolutely. That was a front page story in the Post, and that was so compelling to me. And, to your point about that, those are precisely the kinds of stories that you can tell on the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate. You can bring this alive to people. It's one thing to give statistics and numbers and, which are important, but when you tell those kinds of stories and people begin to think, what about me? But it is going to be a battle, and I think that the notion that look, everybody I talk to, all my family, all my friends, I'm sure you have the same experience, and a lot of your listeners. Folks say, "Oh God, this is just too hard. I'm losing sleep. I'm irritable. I'm angry. You can deal with these kinds of political issues and still be kind to your neighbors and still spend time with your family and friends and still talk about what British mysteries you were just watching on television. I mean, you can do things that keep your spirits up and also take on the battles. It isn't an either-or situation, but I think a lot of people...
It can't be. Nobody can wage war on this administration 24/7. That is a recipe for ending up in the loony bin. I always tell my listeners, look, first of all, you can't do everything, but you can do something. Is there a cause that's near and dear to your heart? Do you care about libraries? Do you care about books? Do you care about women's rights? Do you care about immigration? There are groups that are doing that work. And if you just want to be a Democrat, find your local Democratic organization or find your local Indivisible if you feel like being an activist. There's something out there for everyone. But people need to also tend to their mental health. Because I got to tell you, for weeks after the election, I had this horrible stomach ache, Peter. I mean, I had a day in and day out. And I kept thinking, the usual, well, gosh, what did I eat? Did I not get good sleep? Why do I? And after about 3 weeks, I was like, no, this is because of the stress of where we are and what I'm now going to have to slog through for the next 4 years. And that's when I realized I got to take care of myself.
You got it. My back went out 2 days after the election. Yeah. And it took me the same thing, about 3 weeks. I said, well, I just need to do more exercises. I just need to, I said, well, I know where that's coming from.
Yep.
But it is amazing, when you talk to people about this, and I think that there's no question that you sit down there and you write some letters or send some emails or make some phone calls to your legislators. You leave some messages. Well, it doesn't take you that long to do that.
Nope,
and
it does not.
You feel a whole lot better after you've done a few things like that. But you're right. Decide what your passion is and go for it. And the other thing I think that the Democratic members can do, and other members and people who used to serve in Congress, maybe even who care about the institution, if the Republicans are not going to have town meetings, well, we'll have them.
Exactly. Democrats need to go into the Republican districts and hold town halls.
They're doing it in Idaho. My two former clients, a guy named Larry LaRocco, who was a congressman there for several terms, and Richard Stallings. These guys are, they're up there in age, but they're still smart as hell. They're still articulate as hell. They still know the issues, and they're going around and getting crowds of 150, 200 people throughout Idaho. They just started this, and they're getting some press attention because those four the two senators, two members of Congress are all Republicans out there, of course, and they won't do it. They have signs on their doors, some of them, saying, oh, we don't take walk-ins anymore. Here, call this number for an appointment. Well, excuse me? I mean, the door's locked to a member of Congressman's office, and then the press asks them, where are you going? What are you doing? When are you meeting with constituents? And they don't get a response. That won't sit. That dog won't hunt.
Yeah.
And you know, I think there is a lot we can do, I think, and folks out there can do so. Hopefully we'll get that rolling. But
Peter, we need to take a real quick break. There's so much more I want to talk to you about. I'm talking to Peter Fenn, a Democratic political strategist. Also, you might want to sign up for his newsletter. It's called Fenn Daily, Fenn, fenndaily.com. We are going to be right back after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
Hey Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
I'm talking with Peter Fenn, who's a Democratic political strategist. You may want to sign up for his newsletter, Fenn Daily. Fenndaily.com is where you can find it. Peter, Chris Murphy said very recently, I would never have thought I would be calling Chris Murphy the firebrand, but, you know, events create heroes sometimes, and he has been one of the most passionate Democrats who has been out there banging the drum before the other Democrats seemed to wake up to the fact that there was a problem. Anyway, Chris Murphy said recently that he thought that unless something changes, we have no more than 6 months left of our democracy. Now, I think that with certain conditions, my feeling is he could be right, but I think that as we've seen the stock market tank again, and we know that one of the few things Donald Trump pays attention to is the stock market. I think that when Donald Trump sees the effects of what he's doing, he's going to try to fix things. Like in his first term, when China said, okay, Illinois farmers, we're not buying any more of your soybeans ever again. We're buying them from Brazil. We're buying them from other places. And then Donald Trump ended up writing checks to farmers that cost the government more than any perceived savings because of tariffs. So I think that as people start losing their jobs, supposedly the jobs numbers are coming out tomorrow. They're going to be bad. The stock market has been tanking. I think that Trump is not, I think he's a very street smart guy, and he likes certain barometers to refer to show his success. And if those start tanking, I think he might change course. But what do you think of Chris Murphy's statement?
Well, I think, first of all, I totally agree with you about Chris Murphy. I think he's absolutely terrific, and I've been following him for quite a while. He is one very smart, very savvy, very committed guy, and he, you know, I think he has his finger on the pulse. I think it is scary. I mean, I think it is very, very scary because it can go two ways, Joan. It can go to him changing, like he's done with the tariffs, with Canada and Mexico on the cars. I mean, he gets a call from Ford, and he said, and they tell him the cost of a car is going to increase by $10,000. Now, are they going to buy a Kia or are they going to buy a Ford? You know, and you know, I mean, and suddenly, well, we better consider that. So there, you know, there is that possibility. But the problem, Joan, with somebody like Trump is he blames everybody else around him. He blames so you could see a situation, and he's already done it with a few people, where he didn't like what was going on with immigration. So this woman had been in the job 2 weeks. She's fired. I mean, he could reach out and create even more chaos than is currently there.
But
so
Peter, don't you think that that's why he insulates himself? When he wanted Zelensky told that he was being kicked out of the White House, he didn't do it. He sent Marco Rubio. I think that, first of all, there's the fact that he worships really rich people and he loves Elon Musk's money just inordinately. But I think Elon Musk also insulates him. Elon is doing exactly what Trump wants. But if it really blows up, if it really goes nuclear, Trump's got a scapegoat. Well, Elon meant well, but he went too far. I never really authorized any of the stuff he did, but I was willing to let him go since, this, that, or the other. But, sorry, but it's him. It's not me. I think that's a big part of one of the big things that Elon Musk brings to the table.
Right, that he can ultimately be expendable, and I think that's conceivable, because what is he like? He wants to be loved by people. Oh, I love the farmers. I love the seniors. Yeah, he loved the farmers last time, as you say, when he gave him $28 billion, bailout, which this time you don't have that money laying around, Donald. I mean, it's going to be a little hard to fix some of these things, especially when you're breaking to China, but I think either way, though, I mean, if he moderates or does things and things kind of get a little bit better, I don't think they're going to get that much better. But the other part of it is that all hell's breaking loose. Right? Suddenly, eggs increased like they're predicted, 40%. Suddenly, you're on Medicaid, and they're not finding $880 billion under a cushion. I mean, and they're going to do this. They're going to take it out. And then he does stupid things, like he says, I'm not going to tax your Social Security benefits. Well, Joan, 50% of Americans who get Social Security, none of it's taxed because of their income level. Who are these people that he's going to help? To be perfectly blunt, they're people like me. I have my Social Security taxes because I'm still working. I'm still making money. I don't begrudge paying that.
No, I'm in the same boat.
Oh, come on. I mean, give me a break, people. But, a lot of people, when they hear that, they don't think about it. Well, you tell them, hey, again, this ain't for you. This is for his very wealthy friends. And every single time he does one of these things, he gets himself into trouble. So, I hope he does. I think Murphy's point, which is potentially right, because if the Republicans, and we don't need many of them, but if none of them say, hey, the emperor has no clothes here. This budget agreement, which we all voted for, it's all BS. I mean, these guys are thinking, we got a $36 trillion deficit. This is going to help? No. This is going to hurt. And they can't, and they have trouble looking at themselves in the mirror. The Chuck Roys of the world, or whatever his name is,
Chip
in Texas,
Roy,
people like Chip, Chip off the old block. Yeah, but the question is, do these folks keep going along with it, and do we end up like Hungary? Do we suddenly decide, does he decide that the way to handle this problem is, AP, you're out. Politico, you're out. New York Times, you're out. And decides that he's going to, basically control the press. And then he is already, the Justice Department is his own private law firm. Yep. I mean, he decides he's going to go after people. Yeah, he did it before. He's going to do it again. And that's what I think Murphy's talking about. If stuff starts going down that road, but Joan, Levitsky, who's also very good, who wrote the first, co-authored the first book about how democracies die. What he's saying is the danger is people won't fight back. The danger is you'll say, "Oh, geez, I'm going to just stay in my law firm, stay in my lane, not do anything." I think that if stuff goes down, I do think it's going to be 6 months to a year, to be perfectly honest, the way this is moving. But I think people, we've been around a while in the United States. We've been through a lot. And I think people will stand up and step up. And, I mean, my father, who was head of the Kennedy Library, worked in the Kennedy White House, lived in Lexington, Massachusetts, was a Lexington Minuteman along with my younger brother up there. And I tell you, when Donald Trump might decide to go to Lexington for the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington and Concord, if that happens, it's going to be one heck of an operation, because what he's going to be talking about is not what those guys were standing up for during their whole lives. I mean,
Peter, we've got to take a break for news. I'm going to be back with Peter Fenn, Democratic political strategist. We have so much more ground to cover. We're going to be right back after the news.
The Thom Hartmann radio program provides all of the intelligence, information, and insight you'll need to win the water cooler wars. Weekdays 11 to 2 right here on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
I want somebody who's passionate. I want somebody who can talk to people like a real person, who can make people feel things, who can make people want to follow them.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
I am back, and Peter Fenn is back as well. He's a Democratic political strategist, and you might want to read his newsletter, Fenn Daily, FENN daily.com. There's so many things that I want to talk to you about. I mentioned about the jobs report, Peter, that's going to come out tomorrow. It's predicted to be bad. CNN Business was reporting U.S. employers cut more jobs last month than any February since 2009. And here's the thing that I found interesting. I didn't realize that the CNN business pages have something Peter called a fear and greed index. I kid you not, a fear and greed index. And it's supposed to be what's driving the market. And they look at all kinds of weird stuff like stock prices and put and call options and market volatility and all kinds of other stuff that I probably don't understand. But right now, we are in an extreme fear situation. It is extreme fear that is driving the market right now. That can't be good. Peter, that can't be good.
Well, I wonder where that fear comes from.
I wonder.
Where could that fear come from?
Not knowing from one day to the next where your government stands?
Exactly. I think that's one of the things, you hear it all the time. Business wants stability. They want normal. Our allies want normal. They want stability. They want to know when you make an agreement or you say you're going to do something that you stick by it. And I don't know if you're an international company these days and you're based, say, in Europe or, for that matter, in Canada or Mexico, whether you are going to buy in to what's going on. I mean, you'll pull back. You'll say, is this a time to expand and hire people? Is this a time to take some risks? He keeps talking about risks. The answer, clearly, if you think things are unstable, is no. And I have some friends in business. Fairly, we used to do a lot of work for some of the car companies and folks, and they. I've talked to some of them lately, and initially they said, well, we've got a pretty good Secretary of the Treasury. And I thought to myself, well, let's see how long that lasts. Or, the 98 to 0 vote for Rubio, the Democrats are like, what happened to Marco Rubio?
Yeah,
I'm
you know
sorry,
what? I'm really surprised. Maybe they got confused because they see him on a daily basis. But from where I was sitting, I'm not at all surprised that Marco Rubio has become a sock puppet for Donald Trump, because any guy who says to Donald Trump, yes, I'm this Cuban activist and I Florida, my people, and I'm going to fight for you. Oh, but I'll move out of the state if you make me your vice president. Right then and there, I think we had Marco Rubio's measure as a man.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I know very little about some of these folks in the business community in the Treasury Department, but I think that's the one thing you learned in the first administration was if you weren't all in all the time, you were screwed. And
you take a tiny step out of line. There's one thing on page 27, Part B, you don't agree with, you're done. You're out. You're absolutely gone.
Yep. But to your central point here, if we've got fear and greed governing things right now, if the recession starts to happen, which if these tariffs are going to cause it, I mean, everybody I've talked to, every piece I've read, folks say, hey, look, come on. I mean, this is predetermined if he goes through with this stuff, and. Then how does he, get himself out of that? That's another real question. But they're going to pass this insane legislation for cutting taxes and for cutting $880 billion for Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security, whatever. And what are they going to be left with? I mean, the economy is going to be, I would sure think, in shambles, because we tried trickle down now about 3 times.
Really?
It just doesn't work. So I just that's the part of it that I mean when I worked in the Senate, it was like we had a lot of pragmatic people. We had a lot of folks said, I'll work with Democrats, I'll work with Republicans, I'll put together alliances in order to get something done, in order to deliver. And the members were very pragmatic about what they were proposing and legislating on. This crowd, I don't think the word pragmatic is in their vocabulary up there. And and I think it's mainly the Republicans, but there are some Democrats. It's like, come on, folks, you've got to tell your constituents that you're working to deliver for them. So I don't know. No, it's a tough one right now for sure on this.
Peter, I have a question. Doug Ford, who is now one of my most favorite people on the planet, he is the premier of the province of Ontario. And as I've explained to my listeners, it's not really like being the governor of a state. A premier has much more power. A premier can just decide things and doesn't have to get everybody else to sign off on it in the rest of the country, which is actually part of the reason why Canada has been making huge inroads into TV and film production, because the premier can just say, you know what, we're going to offer greater tax breaks. It starts next week. Whereas Gavin Newsom says, we're going to offer bigger tax breaks. And as soon as I convince the legislature to bring the bill and they vote on it, as early as a year from now, we could be doing this. Anyway, I digress. Doug Ford seems to be able to do something that nobody in our government is able to do, and that's basically stand up to Elon Musk. Everybody's so afraid, he'll use his money to primary me and I will lose my seat. Doug Ford is a human being. He leads the province of Ontario in Canada. I'm sure Elon Musk could find many ways to try to make his life difficult, but the guy was saying, you know what? We've decided we're tearing up all of our contracts with Starlink. It's done. it's over. And oh, by the way, none of our government agencies are going to sign any contracts with any U.S. company. Oh, gosh, look at that. A man who is seemingly not afraid of Elon Musk's deep pockets and how they might come after him. It's singular.
You know, I think that the bully nature of both Trump and Musk is so extraordinary that when somebody, the only way to deal with these guys is to stand right up to them. And you're right, he has the power, and some of the other folks in Canada have done similar things, you know, especially in terms of agricultural products, or saying, oh, yeah, well, we forget sending our, and this is especially good for the folks from Kentucky, like Mitch McConnell, you're not sending your Kentucky bourbon our way. And that may sound like small stuff, but especially when it's Starlink, and especially when it goes right to their pocketbooks, these guys don't like it. And I think that one of the things, you look at the Canadian politics right now, oh my, I mean, Trudeau was dead, right?
Yep.
He was gone. He was out of it.
I think Trudeau shot himself in the foot, because when Donald Trump started saber rattling, instead of Trudeau channeling his inner Doug Ford and saying, dude, you know, you don't want a war with us, but if you bring it, trust me, we'll be there. No, Trudeau was like, oh, what can we do? Let me go to Mar-a-Lago. Let me meet with Donald Trump. And I thought to myself, your career is over. And sure enough, there it went.
Yeah, but the Liberal Party, I mean, they picked up 20 points, and we'll see how that whole thing turns out. But suddenly, you know, there's nothing that gives you spine like winning a few, right? And he probably is looking to Ford and others who will really take Trump and you know, the other thing is the condescension, Joan, on this. I mean, you know, how many of us, you know, you're closer to it up there than I, but I went to school in Minnesota, and, you know, a lot of, you know, Canadians across the border, and, you know, they've had it with that stuff. And 51st state silliness is, you know, that's an anathema to them. So I don't know. I just think it's great. I mean, I think it's great to have somebody who tears up this kind. I mean, that's why I always loved, you know, Pelosi when she did it, not just figuratively, but literally, she tore up his speech, and that was a message that people have to give to those guys. No, we won't do this. This isn't going to happen under our watch. So, you know, so you have had him on your show, I hope, a lot. Ford.
Oh, I want to vote for him. I want to bring him across the border. I'll kidnap him if I have to, if need be. Oh, by the way, you know, you and I were talking about how Trump tries to never take any responsibility. There was a thing, I guess he did another press availability in the White House, and they were somebody was asking him about all the people losing their jobs. I think it's just starting to dawn on him that this could really come back to bite him. And he said to the reporters that it was up to the cabinet. Each cabinet member should really keep the good people, you know, let the bad people go. But he expects his cabinet members to keep the good people. Oh my God! Not since the John Gotti, the Teflon Don, have I seen someone who takes less responsibility.
Yeah. No, absolutely true. And this is mafia-like, as a lot of people have said. I mean,
he acts like a mob boss.
George Will today had a column, the conservative columnist who's been with the Post forever, you know, Nancy Reagan's best friend. You know, George Will had a column. I've never seen anything like it. He ripped into Trump, and he said, and to Musk, and he said, you know, this is your call, you guys. You're the ones that are doing this. and he was as tough as I have ever seen him. But it's going to be very, very interesting to see how this shakes down and how fast it shakes down, because in terms of firing people. Oh, the swamp in Washington, where of course I'm speaking to you from, 83% of federal workers work not in our area, not in Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. They're not here. They're around the country. 15% of federal workers are in this area. That's all. And somehow people, so that when this starts happening, and you have demonstrations because National Park Service folks are getting fired in their local small towns, and state capitals are fine, but you find a whole different shift in public opinion and people's concerns, and then you try to pass the buck. That's the other thing. I want to. Trump used it. I thought to myself, man, you do not believe the buck stops here. In fact,
oh God, no.
You believe the buck is made there. I mean, you're going to make more money. That's where the buck comes into play. But Trump is never been anybody to accept any sort of personal responsibility for anything. So I don't see that changing ever. I do a lot of reading, as you might imagine, Peter, to get ready for the show, but I try to stick with there's so much going on in the world. I just stick with fact-based, this is happening. So opinion pieces are pretty far down the list of things that I read on a daily basis, but I just pulled up the George Will opinion piece, and it is amazing. The title, folks, is "This is American Greatness Only If You Have a Magnifying Glass." And it's in the Washington Post, which I've already told you I've canceled my subscription, but I'm already paid through the end of the month, and they don't do refunds, so I'm still getting it. He says things like, "Do Rubio's muscles cramp during prolonged genuflections? So smitten is Trump with Putin that he cannot fathom that the Russian leader surely considers him a weakling. Putin knows that Trump knows, but is too servile to say who invaded whom in February of 2022. Vice President J.D. Vance is earning the description Winston Churchill applied to Dwight D. Eisenhower's Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, a bull who carries a china shop around with him. Vance recently suggested on X that Europe's largest war since 1945 is just another product of those tiresome old world ethnic rivalries." And then he goes on to talk about Musk and protectionism and the only thing that I've ever enjoyed is when George Will writes about baseball. The rest of it I take with a grain of salt. That's right. He's great about baseball, but he nailed it there, and you could tell. I mean, David Brooks goes that way a little bit in the Times, but this is one of the toughest columns against Republicans I've ever seen from George Will, and I think that has impact with some folks. I really do. But as you say, for someone who writes so well, and you can turn it on. It's.
And we were having a discussion about Doug Ford standing up to Elon Musk, something that seems to be anathema in our elected officials. Elon Musk, this is George Will writing in the Washington Post, folks. Elon Musk, who, like Trump, confuses hyperactivity with achievement, is, like Trump, incapable of imagining how his incessant spouting off is making him smaller. Woo!
Yeah, really good. And, I think one of the things that a lot of these people are now seeing is, when they come out and say, well, we're canceling 875 veterans contracts and we're likely to lay off 80,000 veterans, and going after the VA, and then the next week they say, oh well, it'll only be 585 contracts. They're looking at this saying, whoa, this is incompetence, as we were talking about. This is dead wrong. They don't know what they're doing, and that I think that and then when they sell their souls, these guys. As you and I have been talking about, that George Will, I mean, that's the kind of thing that just frosts him. He may be fine with him cutting EPA or whatever he doesn't like, but the important. I said this in one of my columns. I said they thought they were going after the low-hanging fruit. They're cutting down the trees.
Yeah.
And that is really what's at the heart of this. And I think that's to go back to your earlier question about Murphy. I think that's what he's seeing is the trees are getting cut down. And then the question becomes, even with they thought AID would be their low-hanging fruit. Well, wait a second. People are dying.
I think that was a calculation. Oh, nobody in this country likes the idea of giving money to other countries. Nobody likes that. That's, we'll start there and everybody will be like, yes, it's about time someone cut all that silly foreign aid. We don't need soft power. Heavens no.
Right. And now we're talking about, there are 3 states that have legislation up to prohibit COVID vaccines in the states. And you're going like, what? I mean, you guys, how far you want to take this? And then, there's so many things that because they're so-called flooding the zone, as Steve Bannon would say, the key word is flooding.
Yeah.
You are really flooding everything to the point where you're sinking houses and cars and people. I mean, that's what the flooding is all about, unfortunately, right now. So, well, we shall see.
Yeah. I don't want to, though. Is there another option, Peter?
Well, I'm not.
I've had some tough times in my life, and
pretty good.
People have always said, "Oh, you're so brave," and I always say the same thing to them. Was there another option? Because believe me, if I could have found it, I would have taken it.
Right. No, I think that our mindsets should be turned to what can we suggest to people that they can do, what can be effective and impactful, what ideas are out there that can turn the tide back to normal good, right? And I think that's where a lot of people like you are so important to this fight and to this debate, because if we don't and we let them roll us and we don't act like Ford taking them on, then it'll just get worse. I mean, we know what direction that is.
Yeah, and I think most people at the grassroots level can see that. And I think that even people who voted for Donald Trump, I'm so tired of I didn't think he would do this. You didn't think that. Let's just stop that sentence right there. James Carville, whether, Democrats listen to him or not, we're going to see the hardship that this brings. And, Peter, when I march in Washington, I hope you're right beside me.
I will be. You just call me. I'll be there.
All right. Peter Fenn.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. You should be reading his newsletter, Fenn Daily, fenndaily.com. We're going to take a break, and I'm going to expound. I'm going to wrap things up after this.
The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath, Saturdays at 1 p.m.
Count me among the Americans that want to see change. Now, of course, the change I was looking for would have put Kamala Harris in the White House. Americans voted for change. They just, Trump, I think they got the wrong kind. Still, I'm grateful for elections, even when we lose. They tell us about ourselves, and we can't ignore that and shouldn't.
The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath, Saturdays at 1 p.m.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I do want to talk about the Democratic senatorial response to Trump's announcement that he's going to get rid of the Department of Education. But this is going to be our life. There has been so much information, so much news that has broken while we have been on the air. For instance, in Texas, we have now had a second measles death. An adult has now succumbed. Earlier, a 6-year-old died February 26th. So we have a second measles death. Get ready for illnesses that you thought were gone to make a resurgence. Bobby Kennedy isn't the only one who's an anti-vaxxer, and he is not going to do anything to undermine anti-vaxxers. Second death confirmed in growing measles outbreak. And also, a group of senators, including our very own Dick Durbin, have asked the D.C. Office of Disciplinary Counsel to look into January 6th organizer Ed Martin and what they describe as the torrent of abnormal and rule-shattering statements that Ed Martin has issued since Trump gave him his job, his first ever prosecutorial job as D.C. U.S. Attorney. So this note, by the way, in case you want to know who else is trying to shed some light on Ed Martin, Dick Durbin, Mazie Hirono from Hawaii, Alex Padilla, Chris Coons, Cory Booker from New Jersey, of course, Adam Schiff, California, Sheldon Whitehouse, Ohio, Richard Blumenthal. They are asking the Office of Disciplinary Counsel to take a look at these abnormal and illegal orders. Along those lines, U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell says the head of the National Labor Relations Board or a member of the National Labor Relations Board that Trump fired, that firing was illegal. Beryl Howell says Gwyneth Wilcox must remain at the federal agency. Of course, the National Labor Relations Board oversees all kinds of relationships, workers, labor unions, employers. This from the Washington Post? The Washington Post is also saying that this ruling that U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell made, saying that Gwen Wilcox was fired illegally and indeed does still remain on the National Labor Relations Board. This, along with several other judicial rulings, is setting up a Supreme Court showdown over presidential powers. And who knows? Ray said that he saw a report. Apparently, as Donald Trump was leaving, he leaned over and shook Chief Justice John Roberts' hands and was caught on an open mic saying something like, "Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I won't forget it." Okay, that's interesting. Wonder what they were talking about. Maybe somebody Donald Trump knows has been given an internship. What do you think? Do you think it's as mild as that? I don't either. I don't either. But I think that's interesting. So, Donald Trump making the announcement that he said this in his first term as president, that he wanted to get rid of the Department of Education. Remember, he put Betsy DeVos in charge of it, and somehow either wasn't able to or never got around to getting rid of the Department of Education. Well, he's making another stab at it. Some of the texters who were joining our conversation at the beginning of the show, people whose comments I didn't get a chance to get to, on this effort to eliminate the Department of Education. Somebody texted in, a sad day in our country's history playing out with our educational system. Charter schools are not the only answer. They're full of corruption and greed. Case in point, a charter school superintendent being paid over $800,000 a year when you add in the bonuses. Charter schools are often touted as just a different sort of version of public school, but that's not really accurate, because charter schools, public schools have to, they're public. They are open to the public. They have to take any of the students that either live in the area or otherwise qualify for admission based on busing or where they live. Public schools can't say, you're not doing well. You're making our test score numbers look bad. Therefore, we're going to expel you from our school, or we are not going to allow you to move from middle school to our high school because you make us look bad. You don't have the test scores. You don't have the grades that we want to advertise so that we get more kids coming in. Charter schools are usually not union schools, which means that charter schools don't have to offer teachers the same pay and the same benefits. And if you're a young teacher starting out and that's the only job you can find, it's like right to work for less. Charter schools sometimes only want people of a certain religion. Charter schools sometimes they don't want to deal with anybody who has behavioral issues, and sometimes they don't even want to deal with people who have disabilities. And private schools run the same way. Just because you're willing to spend, $30,000 for tuition to get your kid into a high school doesn't mean that they will take your kid. If your kid requires extra resources, that might just be a bridge too far. So this is an attack on public schools. I told you earlier what Bernie Sanders had to say, that, again, we are a government that is apparently being run by and for billionaires, and billionaires, here's a shock, really don't send their kids to public school. They really don't. And they don't care about public schools. And they don't really see why public schools should exist. Today, our new favorite Senator Chris Murphy was at this Democratic senatorial press conference where he and Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer talked about this effort to kill the Department of Education. Chris Murphy always cuts to the chase. He cares so much, and he is somebody who embodies the Democratic leadership we say we always want, somebody who's willing to lead the charge, somebody who's willing to break a few rules and make his loud voice heard. This was from the Senate Democratic press conference this morning. This is Chris Murphy talking about closing the Department of Education. Listen to this.
So nobody wants this. Nobody in America wants the destruction of public education. The plan to eliminate the Department of Education is wildly unpopular in this country, except with a handful of people on the fringy right. So the question is, why are they doing it? Listen, I think Bernie's point is really important, right? Billionaires do not need public schools. Billionaires don't understand the magic that happens in public schools. The billionaires that are in charge of our government right now send their kids to the most elite private schools, and if every public school disappears in this country, they will still be able to get their kids an education. So the billionaire mindset is just different than ordinary average Americans, and that's why to them public education doesn't matter. But to Senator Schumer's point, here's the other reason why. All that matters right now is the billionaire and corporate tax cut. All that matters is hoarding as much money, stealing as much money from middle class and poor families in this country so that they can pass that money along to the billionaires, the millionaires, and the corporations. But then here's the last piece of the story of why. The billionaire class, the corporate class, the private equity class, they are sick to death that they don't have their hands inside the Department of Education Treasury, that they can't get their hands on our schools like they've gotten their hands into our healthcare system and into every other aspect of our economy. What they want to do is to sell off our public schools to the highest bidder. Right? The voucher program that they're talking about, that they will be more easily able to implement if the Department of Education is gone, is really about just making it easier for the billionaire and corporate class to be able to buy up our schools so that they can make money off of it like they make money off of the Medicare program, like they make money off of so many other aspects of our government. So if the Department of Education closes, it's going to hurt millions of families in this country. It's just going to enable the theft of resources from regular families to pad the pockets of the billionaires. But it is also likely to result in you waking up one day and finding out that your local elementary school that your kids go to is owned by a private equity firm on the other side of the country and is being run for profit instead of being run for the education of your kids.
He's exactly right. And those of you who have loved ones in nursing homes have often seen the same thing. You put your loved one in a nursing home and they're getting good care and they're good people, and suddenly a hedge fund, a venture capital group, comes in and buys the nursing home, and all of a sudden there are staff cutbacks and all kinds of other things. The meals aren't quite as good because they're in it to make a profit. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
If you are thinking of buying a new home, maybe a condo, maybe a house, if you've decided it's time to refinance because rates are down a tick, then you need to call Team Hochberg. And even if there was a different company that you did your original mortgage with, you might have a lot of trouble getting in touch with them because they might not be in business anymore. 165,000 mortgage professionals didn't renew their licenses over the last couple of years. It's been a tough business. So the company that you did your deal with may not even exist anymore, which is a perfect time to give Team Hochberg a try. They are your trusted local lender. I can speak from personal experience. I've used them 2 or 3 times to refinance, and they make what to me is a difficult process easy to manage. You know, sign here, sign there, this is that. They make sure I understand what's going on, but they also make sure I don't have to really work too hard to make it happen. So give them a call. Ask for a free consultation. You've got nothing to lose. And with 165,000 loan officers no longer doing loans, they might be your only alternative, but it's a good one. 855-563-2843 or go online 56david.com. That number again, 855-563-2843, or go online, 56david.com. Lower.com equal housing lender, NMLS 1124061.
Don't turn that dial. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now.
A fair balance where the facts come out.
On WCPT 820.
I do want to let you know what's going on schedule-wise for my show and what's on Patty's show. But first, I just have a little bit more to say about this move to get rid of the Department of Education. A lot of people are up in arms about this, and rightly so. As you know, I'm not a huge fan of Chuck Schumer. I think that his... How can I say this and not be too rude? I think that his interactions with the American people tend to be, for lack of a better word, bloodless. He seems very, sort of ivory tower and detached. But, like Dick Durbin, you just start to write them off and all of a sudden they come out. And they show you their passion and their caring. And Chuck Schumer did that today at the Senate Democratic press conference when he and Senator Murphy and Senator Bernie Sanders were talking about Trump's announcement that he's closing the Department of Education. Now, knowing Donald Trump, he's probably going to try to do it by executive order when, of course, that is not the legal way to do it. So who knows what's finally going to happen. He couldn't get it done his first term. We'll see if he approaches it any more intelligently in this second term. But it's a stated goal. He wants to do it. So I'm going to share with you right now what Chuck Schumer had to say about this earlier today.
This would be, if it happens, one of the most destructive and devastating steps that Donald Trump has ever taken. Who's going to be the victim? Americans' kids, America's school children. To get tax breaks for his billionaire friends and hurt our school children? I don't think that's what America wants. I don't think that's what America bought into. I sent my kids to public schools in New York City. Public schools are the bedrock of our country. I went to public schools. In fact...
And they don't always succeed, as you saw, most of the time.
We went to Madison High School together, and I think PS 197? Yes. Okay. But in any case, the 90% of Americans, 90% of students in the United States attend public schools, and every single district will suffer because of what Donald Trump is doing. Again, America, he's using your kids' education money to give tax breaks to his billionaire buddies. It's that simple. He's looking to find any money he can so his billionaire club can pay even less taxes. And this is why every single Democrat said hell no to the nomination of Linda McMahon, one of the only nominees in history tasked with destroying the very agency she's trying to lead. Linda McMahon wants to detonate the Department of Education. So why is she taking the job? Just to be destructive. The blast radius of this order will harm nearly every child, every teacher, every family, and every community. Taking a chainsaw to the Department of Education and undermining its mission to educate our next generation would be horrible for our schools, our families, the children Secretary McMahon is supposed to serve. And don't forget, defunding education means property taxes will go up across the country, particularly in suburban districts. If there's things that are wasteful, show us what they are. But don't use the chainsaw to just eliminate the Department of Education and public education because you're gambling with our kids' future. Democrats will fight this awful decision every step of the way.
Senator Chuck Schumer, leader of the Democrats in the minority in the Senate, talking about Donald Trump's efforts and announcement that he wanted to get rid of the Department of Education. That Linda McMahon, who has been confirmed as the Department of Education cabinet member, She's the one from World Wrestling, remember? Which, is a perfect person. Betsy DeVos was basically just a rich person. So, Donald Trump does not actually want anybody in his cabinet who is experienced and competent. He just wants toadies. And that's what he's got. And that's what the Republicans in the Senate allowed to happen. Toadies here and toadies there. So there's not going to be any pushback. There's not going to be anybody within the Trump administration trying to put up guardrails and protect the country from his worst behavior. No. Those people are gone, long gone. He learned his lesson. You don't have to know anything. You don't have to have much of a resume. You could even have some bad things in your resume, but if you are loyal to Donald Trump, you are good to go. Somebody else this earlier today texted in about all this Department of Education stuff. It is my belief that part of this is to destroy the school unions and create an uneducated working class who will be grateful to eat the crumbs off the floor. Well, whether or not that's an intended outcome, it is certainly a logical one. I really wanted to end tonight on an upbeat note, and here it is. Tomorrow, William Muck is going to be here, and he is one of the most positive human beings around. You can just, when you hear him on the radio, you can hear that he is smiling as he is talking, which I used to be able to do, but I seem to have lost that ability. But I'm going to take a few days off. I'm going to go out to California. I'm going to see my daughter. I'm going to have some fun, maybe ride a horse. I don't know. And I will be back next Thursday. Bill Muck will be here tomorrow, and he's going to be talking to Congressman Sean Casten. Ooh, that's going to be a really good interview because, like Chris Murphy, Sean Casten has been loud and out in front of the movement to oppose, slow down, derail Donald Trump's worst impulses. So that's going to be a really good one. William Muck will also be here Monday, and then on Tuesday will be Turi Ryder, and on Wednesday, John St. Augustine is going to be here. And Thursday, a refreshed Joan Esposito with a smile on her face and a song in her heart is going to be back here on the airwaves with you. We can only hope. Patty Vasquez is up next. She's got a great show today. Mike Quigley, Congressman Mike Quigley, is going to be on with Patty, and she's also going to talk to Josh Weil, who is trying to snag that open congressional seat in Florida's 6th congressional district. And Richard Chu, of course, will be here tomorrow at 6 a.m., and it is a very important day for Richard tomorrow because he has a monthly segment with Mayor Brandon Johnson. That is tomorrow. Richard's on from 6 to 8, and I believe Brandon will be joining him at 7:30 tomorrow morning. Okay, did you take notes? There will be a quiz. I tell you all the time, there's going to be a quiz. If you missed anything this week, remember you can always pick it up on my podcast, either Joan Esposito full episodes or Joan Esposito featured interviews. So if you missed some of this week's goodness, you have an opportunity to catch it again. That is going to do it for me. I will be, I promise you, less crabby a week from now. I really will. And, I'm going to find my zen. I'm going to find my happy place. I'm going to try not to fall off of the horse. All these. I have goals. I have goals, people. I have goals. Take care. I'll see you next Thursday. And good night.